How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're starting Daf Mem Gimel, Daf 43 of Masechta Avodah Zarah. Friends, today is kind of interesting Daf. We're going to get to the next Mishnah. We will be discussing, my glasses are a little dirty. We will be discussing basically the Gemara on the Mishnah that we learned towards the end of the Daf yesterday about if you find different kinds of vessels that have different kinds of drawings on them, and depending what those drawings are and even what those vessels are, they might be permitted, they might be not permitted. We talk about, to some extent, destroying Avodah Zarah, what kind of images can be drawn, what kind of can't. Interesting questions going to come up about images of faces and stuff. That's going to come up. So it's like a little bit of a kind of abstract stuff, but I think that you'll probably be able to find some interesting things in here, though, to at least think about. So, without further ado, let us jump in to Daf Mem Gimel of Masechta Avodah Zarah. Okay, we are going to start on Daf Mem Beis Amid Beis. We got a little work to do there, so I'd say about 15 or 20 lines or so from the bottom of Daf Mem Beis Amid Beis. Mankit Rav Sheshes Chumrei Masnaise Vitoni. Rav Shei says, I don't even know how to translate this exactly, collected Chumrei Masnaise. She's talking about Machlekes Rashi and Tosfos, but how to understand what Chumrei Masnaise are. Rashi understands it like machmir, like stringencies, that Rav Shei took these brises that were particularly stringent and he brought them to the Beis HaMedrash and he raised them. He discussed that he brought up for conversation and discussion these strict brises for everybody to discuss and to talk about. Tosfos says that it means like chomer, like what's chomer? Chomer is like material. It's like material that binds together, right? Like you might take, if you wanted to bind two things together, you might buy some chomer, right? Chomer to connect them. So Tosfos points out, what does he say? He says, David Kimin chomer shekosha v'kol dvarim harbe bichlal yach echot. That he had this brisa that kind of brought a whole bunch of different things together, as we're going to see in the brisa, in the brisa that he brings right now, right? So Makit Rav Sheshes Chumrei Masnaisa, so Rav Sheshes brought these brises, whether they were stringent brises or these brises that bring different things together. But Vitani, and he taught Kol Amazolis Mutarin Chutz Mimazal Chamol Levana. So this is a 3-part brisa. Part number 1 is Kol Amazolis Mutarin, all of the constellations are permitted. Chutz Mimazal Chamol Levana, but not the constellation of the sun and the moon. That is off limits. V'chol HaPartzufin, and all the faces Mutarin are permitted. Chutz mi Partzuf Odom, except for the face of man. V'chol HaTzuris Mutaris, and all of the drawings, maybe, let's say, are permitted. Chutz mitzuras darkin, except for that of a dragon. Okay? 3-part brisa. Part number 1 is all of the constellations are permitted, but not the sun and the moon. Part 2, all of the faces are permitted, but not the face of man. Part 3, all of the shapes, the drawings are permitted, I guess, but not that of a dragon. We just said, Kol Amazolis Mutarin, all of the constellations are permitted, Chutz Mimazal Chamol Levana, except for that of the sun and the moon. B'ma'askinon, what are we talking about? If we're talking about making the constellations, well then, but if we're talking about making the constellations, is it true that all of the constellations are permitted, just not the sun and the moon? The pasuk says, Lo saisun iti, don't make with me. Lo saisun bidmus kidmus shamosha amshamshim lefone bamorim. Do not make the likeness of the servants who serve before me above. So it says, Lo saisun, don't make. And it sounds like that would be a reference to all of the constellations, not just the sun and the moon. So Elapshita b'motzei. uchditzna. So it must be talking about where you find a constellation of the sun and the moon. And we're saying that all constellations that are found, no problem, enjoy them, except for the sun and the moon. As we learned in our Mishnah, Motze Kalim, a person who finds vessels, Valeim Tzuras, Chama, Tzuras Levana, Tzuras Darkin, that our Mishnah had said yesterday, that one who finds vessels, and upon these vessels are drawings of the constellations of the sun, of the moon, of a dragon, you have to bring them to the Dead Sea and throw them in there, never to be seen again. Okay, fine. So if one finds a vessel with all sorts of constellations on there, enjoy. But if those constellations are of the sun and the moon, then you have to bring them to the Dead Sea and chuck them in there. Ibn Motze, but one second. If in fact we are talking about one who finds these things, but Ema Mitzi also, but what about part 2 of the Brisa? Who could remind all of us here at Babylon Talmud what happened in part 2 of the Brisa? Kol ha-partzufis, all faces, mutarin are permitted, chutz mi parts of Adam, except for that of man, except for the face of man. Ibn Motze, and if we're talking about finding, what's wrong with finding the face of man? Parts of Adam Yasser. What's the problem with finding the face of man? We learned in our Mishnah, Motze Caleb, Alem Tzuras Chama, Tzuras Levana, Tzuras Darkon, Yolichem Lamelech, Tzuras Darkon, in parts of Adam Lo. Our Mishnah had said the things that are problematic, the things that must be discarded of in the Dead Sea. Those are constellation of the sun, constellation of the moon, a dragon. That was it. If you find a face, enjoy that. So if we're talking about finding, and we're saying if you find any faces, all good, just not the face of man. Why? What's wrong with finding the face of man? The Mishnah didn't say that was a problem. Rather, it must be talking about where one is making the face of man. You can't make the face of man. And like Rav Huna Bar Yoshua that we're going to learn a little bit later on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis, he has a drush of lo saisun itu lo saisun osi. Don't make me. And I think the point is that bitzelim demus. What does it say? It says nasa adam kitzalmenu chidmusenu. Right, the B'Tselem Elokim also has Adam, right? That man was made in the likeness of God. So therefore, when it says Lo Saisin Iti, it means also don't. And so it means Lo Saisin Osi, don't make me, don't make the face of man. So therefore, section number 2 of the Braisa, when it says all faces are permitted, but not the face of man, that's talking about making. You could make all faces, whatever you want, but not the face of man. But if we're talking about making, well then, I'll go to the third part of the Brisa. Ema Seifa, what does it say at the end of the Brisa? Kol atzuris mutaris, all of the drawings are permitted, chutz mitzuras darkin, except for that of a dragon. Viba ose, if we're talking about making, tzuras darkon, mi oser, is it forbidden to make a dragon? B'aksiv lo saisun iti, Eloi Chesed, Eloi Zov, don't make gods of silver, gods of gold. The Agosabach adds, Lo Saisun Kidmus Shamoshem Shamshim Lefonei Bamarim. Don't make things that are above in the constellations. Hani, Insuras Darkon Lo, but you could make, when it says Lo Saisun Iti, it's not talking about a dragon, make a dragon. So if we're talking about making, right, because we said that by the Adam, we're saying Dafka you can't make the parts of Adam. But if we're talking about making, then when we get to section 3 of the Brisa, which is saying you're not allowed to do a dragon, or we're talking about finding or making, well, if we're saying making, what's wrong with making a dragon? The only things that aren't allowed are the things above in the heavens. Hani answer is Darkon Lo, you should be able to make a dragon. So Pshita B'Motze. Rather, part 3 of the Brisa is talking about when you find a dragon. As we learn in our Mishnah, Where am I? Valeim tzuras chama. Okay, so I assume that means etc. Right? That our Mishnah had said that one who finds vessels and there's the sun, the moon, or a dragon, then you have to dispose of it in the Dead Sea. So it must be that section 3 of the Brisa is talking about finding a dragon is problematic, but making a dragon is okay. That was a little tricky because there were 3 sections of the Brisa. We're trying to figure out, is it making, is it finding? So let's recap. Section number 1, where we talked about the sun and the moon, and we say all constellations are mutter, but not the sun and the moon. That's talking about finding. As we learned in our Mishnah, if you find a vessel with the sun and the moon on it, you have to dispose of it in the Dead Sea. So section 1 of the Brisa is talking about finding. Section 2, where it says not the face of man, that's talking about it's okay to find the face of man, but you can't make the face of man. So section 2 is about making. So section 1, number 1 is talking about finding. Section 2 is talking about making. And then section 3, where we said a dragon is also, it's okay to make a dragon, just not, if you find a dragon, you have to assume it's Avodah Zarah and dispose of it. So that's talking about finding. So section 1 is talking about finding. Section 2 is talking about making. Section 3 is talking about finding. So for the Gemara, on line 3 of Daf Mem Gimel Mid Aleph, Reisha v'Seifa b'Motzu Mitziyasa b'Oseh, how could it be that or otherwise, is it really so that sections 1 and 3 are finding and section 2 is making? Abai says, what's the word I'm thinking of? I don't think it's the word I'm thinking of, but exactly. Section 1, Reisha v'Seifa b'Motzu Mitziyasa b'Oseh. Section 1 and sections 1 and 3 are talking about where one finds a vessel with the sun and the moon, or finds a dragon, and Mitziyasa in the middle section, Ba'os, is talking about one who makes the face of man is not allowed. Rava Omar Kula b'Motze. Rava says that the whole Brisa is talking about finding. The whole Brisa is talking about finding. Okay, so how do we explain what's the problem with finding the face of man? Also, Rabbi Yehuda, the middle clause is Rabbi Yehuda, who says it's a problem to find the face of man, at least in particular scenarios. The Tana's blended the Brisa. Rabbi Yehuda Mosef, Rabbi Yehuda adds Afdmus Meinika, the image of a nursing woman, Visar Apis, as well as the Sar Apis, which is a reference to Yosef Hatzadik. What did I say? Shasar v'naseh, that it became. So let's go weiter for a second. So Manika Hashem Chava Shemanika is Kol Ha'olam Kulo. So the image of a nursing woman is, we're talking about a nursing woman, right? Because of Chava, because Chava nursed the whole world. Sar Apis Hashem Yosef, that's a reference to Yosef. Shasar Umapis is Kol Ha'olam Kulo, that he became a officer, a prince, and he chilled out the whole world. Everybody was nervous. There was a big famine. They didn't know what to do, and he kind of took care of the people. When we say that if one finds a vessel with the image of Joseph or of an officer, it's talking about when he's holding a measure and he's providing food to people. We're talking about the woman who's nursing is not allowed. She has to be holding and nursing a baby. In those scenarios, even simply finding the face, right? Even finding this nursing woman or this, right, the likeness of Joseph who's providing food for people with this measure. So in those scenarios, it would not be okay. You'd have to dispose of them even if you simply find them. That is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and Rava says that the middle clause of that brisa is like Rabbi Yehuda. Tanu Rabbon and the rabbis taught, Ezu Tzuras Darkin, what is the image of a dragon? Perish Sherman ben Elazar, Kol Sheyeshlo Tzitzin ben Prokov. It says of Sherman ben Elazar, if he's got fins between his vertebrae, that seems like a dragon. Machve Reb Asi ben Pirkei Tzaver. Okay, these fins, says Reb Asi, would have to be between the maybe the vertebrae of the neck. Okay. Okay, that I guess this is the image of a dragon. Omar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Chana says in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, that says Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi that one time I was walking behind Rabbi Elazar HaKaper the Great. Baderech, on the way, Umotza Shom Tabas Valetzur as Darkun, and Rabbi Elazar HaKaper Bribi found a ring on the way, and on the ring was the image of a dragon. And he found an Oved Kechovim because he wanted to destroy this ring that had a dragon on it. So the first Oved Kechovim he saw was a miner, and he did not say anything to this miner. But then he found an adult Oved Kechovim, and he says to the adult, Batla, be mevatel this Avodah Zarah, be mevatel this ring, break, destroy this ring that has a dragon on it. V'loi bitla, however, this adult Oved Kechovim refused. Right? We learned. I think it was yesterday. Did we not learn yesterday that an Oved Kechovim can be mevatel Avodah Kechovim shelo v'shel chavero, but a Yid cannot be mevatel Avodah Kechovim. So therefore, Rabbi Elazar HaKaper Brivi was forcing this adult Oved Kechovim to destroy this Avodah Zarah. However, this Oved Kechovim, this adult, was refusing Sitro. So Rabbi Elazar HaKaper Bribi slapped him. Uvitla, and it worked. The Oved Kechovim was then mevatel. He destroyed Avodah Zarah. Shmamina Tlas, we learned three things from this incident. Shmamina Oved Kechovim, mevatel Avodah Kechovim shelo v'shel chavero. Thing number one that we learned is that an Oved Kechovim can be mevatel, can destroy and be mevatel his own Avodah Zarah as well as somebody else's Avodah Zarah. I guess the point is we don't know who this ring belonged to, but this Oved Kechovim destroyed it and it is no longer Avodah Zarah. V'shmamina number two, Yodei Abativ shel Avodah Kechovim u'mishamshel mevatel v'she'enu Yodei Abativ Avodah Kechovim u'mishamshel einu mevatel. I think the point here is that Rabbi Elazar HaKaper Bribi passed over the minor, the child of Oved Kechovim, and instead had the adult Oved Kechovim do the honors of destroying the Avodah Zarah, because in order to destroy the Avodah Zarah, the destroyer would have to understand what he's doing. Would have to understand that this is Avodah Zarah and that he's destroying Avodah Zarah. Therefore, he did not say anything to the minor and instead found an adult. I'm going to read that again. That only one who understands and knows the meaning of Avodah Zarah and its serving, I guess, its service, mevatel can be mevatel Avodah Zarah. However, a minor, for example, one who does not understand Avodah Zarah and its servicing, Eino mevatel cannot be mevatel Avodah Zarah. Shmamina number three, right? So what was number one? Number one was that Avodah Oved Kechovim mevatel Avodah Kechovim shelo v'shel chavero. Number two was that you have to understand what you're doing. And number three, Oved Kechovim mevatel bal korcho, that an Oved Kechovim can be mevatel Avodah Zarah even against his will, as we saw that initially the adult didn't do it. It took Rabbi Elazar HaKaper slapping him in order for him to do it, and then it was considered batal, even though he was forced, he was coerced. Megadev ba Reb Chanina. So Reb Chanina asked an interesting kasha. Why did Rabbi Elazar HaKaper need to be mevatel this avodas, this Avodah Zarah, this ring that had a dragon on it? Why did Rabbi Elazar HaKaper bichlal need to be mevatel it? He found it in the middle of nowhere. Whoever owned it was miyayish. It was a ring that he found in the middle of nowhere. Whoever lost it surely gave up hope of ever getting it back. So therefore it's batal. He's never going to get his Avodah Zarah back. So why did even Bechlal need to be mevatel it? V'leisei Rabbi Elazar HaKaper Bribi, does Rabbi Elazar HaKaper Bribi not hold Hadisani that which learned in the Brisa Matzu Min Ha'ari, somebody who saves Epis, right? There was something got lost and it was being consumed by a lion, for example, and somebody salvages an item from a lion. Well, whoever lost that object and it was being consumed by a lion for sure said, that's the end of that object. I'm never getting that one back. And if somebody salvages it, or from a bear, or from a leopard, or from a troop, or from a river, or from the high tide of a sea, or if a river overflows, and anybody who finds something in like a public highway or a thoroughfare, or any place where there is any public place where there's lots of people, one can keep these items because whoever lost them gave up hope and says, I'm never going to get it back from that lion or from that river or whatever. If it's lost in a big public area, he says, I'm not getting it back. And therefore, Rabbi Chanina asks, I don't understand, why did Rabbi Elazar HaKaper Bribi have to make such a whole big thing out of this and find somebody to be an ovikchom, to mevatel? He refused, he hit him. It was stomach, it should have been bottle anyways. It was a ring that he found in the middle of nowhere, on a path, on the way. Whoever lost it gave up hope. It's no longer Avodah Zarah. Abaye says, so Abaye says an interesting answer. Sure, whoever lost it may be saying, okay, I'm never going to get back this lost object. Vaili lechesron kis, as we learned in Masechta Bava Metzia. Whoever lost it, he's not planning on getting it back. However, so while his hopes of ever being reunited with this object may be gone, he didn't necessarily be mevatel it as an Avodah Zarah. He figures while he may never find it, hopefully somebody else will find it. He says, look, I lost my Avodah Zarah ring. That was a great Avodah Zarah ring. I'll never find it again, but hopefully somebody will find it. Hopefully a nice Ehrlich Ovid Kechovim will find this ring and will make good Avodah Zarah use of it. Meisur Mimiyayish, was Miyayish from the Isser, from the Avodah Zarah-ness of it? Omer, whoever lost it, with the Ovid Kechovim who lost it will surely say, Ovid Kechovim mashkachlo. Hopefully an Ovid Kechovim will find this ring, and if he does, Miflach Palachlo, he will worship it, and that would be great. And you know what? Even if a Yid finds it, you know what? I did the Domer Yikarin, since it's expensive. Instead of destroying it, the Yid hopefully will sell the ring to an Ovid Kechavim Ufalachla, and then that Ovid Kechavim will worship it. So therefore, Abaye answers the question by saying, maybe whoever lost it doesn't expect to ever find it, but he does still hope, he does still regard it as Avodah Zarah and say, even though he may never have the zchus to be Ovid this ring, to serve with this ring, or to serve the ring, or with the ring ever again, but he hopes that whoever finds it will make good use of it, and therefore Rabbi Elazar HaKaper Bribi wanted to make sure that nobody will ever be using this ring for Avodah Zarah ever again, which is why he found in Ovid Kechavim to destroy it for him. So now we get to an interesting Mishnah from Masechta Rosh Hashanah that maybe some of the Chevra from Babylon Talmud remember from Masechta Rosh Hashanah. Chevra, when did we learn Masechta Rosh Hashanah? That was quite a while ago. Chevra, since Masechta Rosh Hashanah, we have learned all of Nashim and almost all of Nezikim. So Rosh Hashanah was even before Yevamis. Sheesh. Tananosam, we learned in Masechta Rosh Hashanah, D'mus Tzuris Levonis Hayalo, that Rabbi Gamliel Ba'aliyaso B'Tavil B'Kriso, that Rabbi Gamliel had I think, diagrams of moons in his attic office on a chart, bakosa on the wall, Shebain Marias Hedjotis, that he would point to them, he would show them to the commoners, And it said to them, Kazarism, did it look like this? Or Kazarism, did it look like that? What is this talking about, friends? Who wants to tell us? Any hands? We got any hands? So of course, in Masechta Rosh Hashanah, we learned all about Eidus HaChodesh. I'm recording on a Wednesday. Shabbos already is Rosh Chodesh Menachem Av. Where they said in the I go to Beit Chabad over here in Nachlot. It's a very special place. I'm a little spoiled, Cheve. I'm a little spoiled. This Beit Chabad, I'm a little spoiled. It's hard for me to daven in other places now. Mamish, it's if anybody's here in Yerushalayim, I recommend that you check out the Beit Chabad over here. It's a very special place. Rav Segel, you have Rav Aaron Dober Segel. He's the Gabbai, and you have Rav Yosef Tzvi Segel. That's his uncle. And wow, they're very special people. There's some very special people at that shul. I'm a little spoiled because it's a little hard to daven anywhere else. But I'll call upon him. So they said, Menachem Av is that our Father in heaven, the Rabboni Shalom should have consolation. And I think maybe Rav Yosef Tzvi Segel pointed out that there's a Gemara that we must have learned together, right? That every day there's a bas kol, I think, that says, right, Oy lebonim shehiglu me'al shulchan avim v'oy le'av shebonav higlu me'al shulchan, or something like that, right? Anyways, Menachem Av, the Rabboni Shalom should have consolation, and we should have Mashiach. Now, so back in the day, Rosh Chodesh was determined when witnesses, of course, would come to Beis Din and they would testify, we saw the new moon, the new month is here, has arrived. So when they would come, Rabbi Gamliel had these diagrams, these, it sounded like they may have actually been physical like diagrams of the moon, and he would point it and say, did it look like this? Did it look like that? So that way he could make sure that everybody was talking about the same thing. So again, it's not also we learned in Masechta Rosh Hashanah, the Tzuris Levonis, that he had these images, these diagrams of the moon. Rabbi Gamliel had Bali also in his attic, Betablo, in a chart, Bakoisa on the wall, Shaboy and Marius Hedjotis, and he would show these to the commoners, and he would be able to sort of talk in diagrams. Achi Pashut. Then he would say, Kozarisim, did the moon look like this? Did the moon look like that? But Umi Shari, how could he be allowed to do that? Right? How could he be allowed to do that? The positive of Saisaniti, don't make with Milo Saisun Kidmus Shamosham Shamshim Lfana. Don't make like the servants that served before me. So how could Rabbi Gamliel have these diagrams of the moon? Rabbi says, interesting. So Abaye says, well, the only things that are not allowed, you're not allowed to make, are the things that you actually can make. No, tell me more. Lo yaise adam bayis kabnis heichel. A person should not make a house that looks like the sanctuary of the temple. The sanctuary of the temple was a physical space with certain dimensions. Don't make your house to be the same dimensions as if Keilu it could technically be the Eichel of the Beis HaMikdash. Don't do that. Or a pavilion with 3 sides closed and 1 side open, don't make that like the ulam in the temple. Or a courtyard like the azara in the Beis HaMikdash. Shulchan tabnis shulchan, or a table that was like the shulchan in the azara. Menorah tabnis menorah, or a menorah like the menorah in the temple. Avalu osa shalhei v'shalvav. You can, however, make a menorah like if it has only 5 branches or 6 branches, v'shal shmone, or 8 branches. V'shal zayin lo yaise, but don't make a menorah with 7 branches. Afilu shel shaminim atechos, even if you make them out of other metals. Don't make a menorah with 7 branches. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda Avshel Eitz Lo Yaiseh, don't even make a menorah of wood, because Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda holds that the menorah can even be made out of wood. Like the Hasmoneans did. Rashi points out in the Diba Maschu Beis Chashmonai, about 10 lines to the bottom of Rashi, Asa'ua b'mikdash shel eitz. They made this, the Hasmoneans made a menorah of wood in the temple. Shetimu Yevanim Esayechel, because the Greeks defiled the sanctuary, v'notlu kol kela, and took all of the vessels. You hear this? And therefore, when the Hasmoneans came, they had to replace the menorah. And when they did replace the menorah, they replaced it with wood. They said to a wooden menorah. They said to Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda, Misham Raya, you're bringing a proof from the Hasmoneans. Shvudin shel barzel are you? No, they were iron rods. Mechupin bibats that were covered in tin. Heshiru, then they became more wealthy. Asom shel kesed, then they made it of silver. Chazav heshiru, they became even more wealthy. Asom shel zav, they were able to afford to then make it of gold. Okay, fine. No, so what do we see? So Abaye argues that what you're not allowed to do is you're not allowed to make things that could actually be made. However, something like the moon, you can't actually make a moon. The moon's up in the sky. You can make like a diagram of the moon, but it's not the moon. We're not going to use it as the moon. It can't be used as, it's not actually a moon. So Abaye says, what's not allowed is things that you can actually, plausibly make, right? Don't make your own menorah like the menorah in the temple, but a moon should be okay. But is it really true that shamoshin, that servants, that it's technically impossible to make are permitted? So meaning we wanted to say that since you can't actually make a moon, it's permitted to make the moon. Is that true? Don't make like the servants who serve before me in the heavens. Even though you can't actually make a functional moon or a sun or angels or whatever, still don't make them. Ravai says, Abaye, Yosotere ela bidmus dalid ponim ba'de adadi. Says Abaye, okay, but what's not allowed is to make 4 faces in one. Right? In Ezekiel, it talks about how there was the Chayos, I think it was the Chayos HaKodesh, that they had the face of an eagle, a lion, a human, and an ox. So don't make an image with all 4 faces on one. However, so that's what's not allowed. But to make a moon would be okay. Elamiyata parts of them. Okay, well then that sounds like if you just make a face of a man, that should be okay. What's not allowed is a 4-sided face with the face of man on one side, another side as an ox, another side as a lion, another side as an eagle. That's not allowed. But a face alone should be acceptable then. But why do we learn in the Brisa? Kol apart sufis mutarin, that all faces are permitted. Chutz mi partzuf adam, right? We learned that earlier. All the faces are permitted, but not the face of man. Okay, so change around some of the Agos Abach changes around some of the words. You ready? Om Rav Huna Bredav Yoshua mi pirke de Abaye shmieli. So says, now we're done with changing words. Says Rav Huna Bredav Yoshua that from the lectures of Abaye I heard lo saisun iti lo saisun osi. Don't make with me, don't make osi, don't make me. And it seems like that would include also man who was created b'tselem Elokim. Don't create man either. Okay, so you're not allowed to make these 4-faced chayos. You also separately can't make an image of man. Havashar Shamosha and Shari, but the other servants, like the moon, for example, would be permitted. Or the moon, or even higher things. Where are we? But is that really true that the others are permitted? So, for example, different angels. Let's see. Don't make with me. Don't make like those servants who serve before me above Kigon, for example, Oifanim, Visrafim, V'chayis HaKodesh, U'malachei HaShares, don't make those either. So Abaye lo asuteri elo shamoshin shebimoder ha'elyon. So it says Abaye, okay, you know what? What's not allowed is sort of the top tier, so to speak, ministers, like the Ofanim and Srafim and Chayis HaKodesh and Malachei HaShares. But to make the moon, which was lower, the sun and the moon, I guess, are in a lower kind of thing, sphere, orbit. So that would be allowed. But is that really true that they would be allowed? So when the Pasuk says, in the heavens, to include not being allowed to make, what's this Pasuk? Pasuk Beis. It says, so when it says Bashamayim, it's l'rabos chamol levanu kochav mazalos. Don't make the sun and the moon and the stars and the constellations mimal above l'rabos malachei hasharis, to include malachei hasharis. So we see that even the sun and the moon and the stars and the constellations are also problematic. No. That pasuk is talking about to serve them, to worship them. But to have them, like Rabbi Gamliel had the moon for testimony purposes, that would be okay. Of them, but if we're talking about serving them, afilu shilshul ka'in nami, then even just a tiny little worm would be forbidden. In a chinami, yeah, you're right, a tiny little worm would be forbidden. Umiseifa dekra nafka, and that's actually learned out from the end of the pasuk. The Tan is willing to buy asher ba'aretz, on the land, l'rabos yamu naharis, to include seas and rivers and mountains and hills, mitachas below the Rabbi Shilshukot, even to include a little worm. You're not even allowed to worship a little worm. So 1 second, you're telling me that it should be okay to make a moon? We learn in the Brisa, don't even make the sun and the moon, the stars and the constellations. All right, so we tried our best, but we've gotten to a dead end. We have a brisa that has informed us, you may not make a moon. So what's the deal? How do Rabbi Gamliel have his diagrams of the moon? And for the Gemara, Shani Rabbi Gamliel, that you know what, it was different when it came to Rabbi Gamliel, the Acherim Asulo, that others made the moon diagrams for him. He didn't make it himself. An Oved Kochavim made it. A non-Jew made them for him. Rav Yehuda Dacherim Asulo, but Rav Yehuda also had a scenario where others made something for him. V'amrei Shmuel Rav Yehuda, and Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, Shinana Sami Eine Didain, and Shmuel said, Rav Yehuda, sharp one, blind the eyes. Okay, so that was talking about, basically it seems that Rav Yehuda had some kind of a signet ring, a ring with a stamp on it, and that stamp had some kind of a face on it, and Rav Yehuda and Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda to knock out the eye on the stamp, even though an Oved Kochavim had made it for him, but also b'chosama, I'm reading that again, b'chosama bolet, because the stamp was protruding, umishum chashada, and there was a concern. No, Shmuel didn't want anybody to chas v'shalom think that Rav Yehuda was worshipping that ring. The Tanya is learning about tabas shechosama bolet, a ring whose seal is protruding. Also lanicha, you may not put it on. But it would be permitted to sign with it, to seal with it, because by stamping whatever wax, I guess you'll be stamping, then the stamp will be not protruding, but what's the impressed, will be depressed, will be pressed in. Depressed maybe is the word. The impressed, something pressed in, right? You use something protruding to stamp and seal and impress. So you could stamp with it, but you can't wear it. Chosama shukeya, if the seal is impressed, is like inward on the ring, well, the mutter la'anicha, you can wear it, but for also lechtomba, but you can't seal with it, because whatever seal you seal, the result would be protruding, and we're concerned about, I guess, worshipping the protrusion. But are we really so concerned about these suspicions of people thinking that maybe you're going to be serving these Avodah Zarahs? But there was the synagogue. So Rashi gives two possibilities of what the synagogue was. Either the Shav v'Narda was an area, a neighborhood or some kind of region in Nahar Da'a in Pavel. Alternatively, it's the name of the shul, was the Shav v'Yosef shul, that they brought stones and earth with them from Eretz Yisrael. What does Rashi say? Rashi says, that Yechonya and those who were exiled with him brought from the stones of Jerusalem and its earth, and they built this synagogue in Narda. That was the Shaf v'Yosef synagogue that they slipped away and settled here in Narda. But in that synagogue, the Ukme Be'andarta, there was some kind of a getchka that they had in the synagogue, some kind of idol in the synagogue, part of the king or something. Maybe. Be'avu Aile Be'avu Dishmuel v'Levi. And Avu Dishmuel as well as Levi, they would pray in this synagogue. Nobody was concerned that they were serving this idol. So Rabbim Shiny, well, it's different when it's in a public place. That could be acceptable, because I guess the public is aware that they as a public are not actually serving this idol. Rabbi Gamliel, the Yochid Hava, okay, but Rabbi Gamliel was alone, right? It was in his office. Shouldn't we have been concerned that maybe he was serving this diagram? Kevin the Nasi Shriche Rabbi Gabe. Well, it wasn't really private, because since he's the Nasi, people are coming in all the time. Be by saying alternatively the Prakim Avoy, or it was like made out of like Legos. You could take it apart and put it together again. So normally it was taken apart, but once a month, when it came for time for Eidos HaChodesh, then he would put it back together so that he could ask the witnesses about what they saw. By saying alternatively, this Lamed Shiny, it's different when you have this diagram in order to be teaching. The Sanyas, when the Bible says, the Pasuk says, don't learn in order to do. But you can learn in order to understand and to teach. And this is b'diyuk what Rabbi Gamliel was doing. He was teaching and using it as a way for the people who came to testify to learn and to understand what exactly they saw. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer v'chulei. So the final section of the Mishnah is that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel had said that what did he say? If he had said in the Mishnah, Sha'al mechubadin asurin sha'al mevuzim mutarin, that if these drawings are on something mechubad, something nice, I don't know if that's a great word, but it's something presentable, honorable, so then that's where it could be a problem, because we're concerned that maybe it's an honorable Avodah Zarah. But if it's on something not particularly special, so then we're not concerned about Avodah Zarah. Ezo ain't mechubadin, what's considered special? Ezo mevuzin, what's considered unspecial? Amirav says mechubadin, special is l'mayla min hamayim, mevuzin l'mata min hamayim. Okay, I think what this means is if you have some kind of a, I don't know, maybe like a teacup or something, some kind of a vessel, and then, you're going to put food in there, drink in there, so the part that, like, the food would be in, if that's where the image is, that's not so special. But if it's above that, then it's more special. Nah, those are both not particularly special. And these are the special things. On a bracelet, on nose rings, tabos, and rings, that's special. We have a price like Shmo Mechubadin. The special stuff is Shalashirin on the bracelets, tabos, and on the nose rings and the rings. Mevuzin, unspecial. Shalayoris, Kimosin, on different pots and kettles, Chamin and hot water makers. Vishal Asdinim, Vishal Mitpachos, and on sheets and linens and stuff like that. Tosfos Taka says it's talking about the rings that are for the linens and things and the sheets. But okay, Fine. That was the Mem Gimel Masechta Avodah Zarah. Today we talked about rings that, vessel. Well, okay, yesterday we learned the Mishnah that vessels that have certain kinds of drawings on them are not allowed. Today we explored that further and what kinds of drawings and diagrams and things can be made. There was a Tosfos that I wanted to, actually, let me get to this. So there's an interesting question. Right? There's an interesting question, which is, right, so we've been talking about faces, right? We say you're not allowed to make faces. Sorry, I'm saying this all the way at the end, but whoever stuck around to here, you get to hear this little thing. It's an interesting thing. We're talking about faces, so you're not allowed to make faces. So what exactly does that mean? So there's a Tosfos here, and that Mem Gimel Mid Aleph, all mamish, the last two lines of Mem Gimel Mid Aleph, says Tosfos, Umiu Osam Tzuris Adam, these drawings, these images of man, Shetzovim Bestinim, that they make with sheets, B'tzvayim, with colors, V'chein Berikmar, with embroidery, Mutar, and they are allowed, parts of Sholim Elachatzi, parts of, because they don't have a whole face. I guess I think maybe what he's saying is that what's not allowed is like sculpture, but something like a drawing or some kind of sewing or things like that could be okay. Yes, it's an interesting question. Like, what exactly does it mean to make a face? Like, what exactly is not allowed? So it sounds like making a drawing or taking a photo or something like that, some kind of 2D thing, should probably be okay. But it's an interesting question, right? What exactly does that mean? So we talked about, right, the kinds of things we can make, the kinds of things that we can't make. What happens if you find different things? So that was Daf Mem Gimel Masechta Avodah Zarah. Hope you enjoyed. Peace.